Well, Ukraine is an unmitigated disaster, and it will be America's undoing unless we stop this war right now. Those are not my words. Those are the words of multiple senior military officials who have just penned a new piece in the New York Times calling for them to end this stupid, unmitigated disaster of a war. We'll get to that part of it in a second. But overnight, Vladimir Putin just launched his biggest attack of the war so far. Analysts are saying the amount, the size, the scope was by far the largest attack since the start of this war. According to multiple reports this morning that we've been piecing together from different sources, overnight and into early daylight hours, Russian aerospace forces started pounding targets in the southern part of Ukraine, specifically NATO targets. These are NATO targets because who's running this war? It's not Ukraine. It's NATO. And so they started hitting these NATO targets near Odessa. These targets are NATO staging grounds that receive cargo from Romania. Most targets are NATO weapons depots, ammunition warehouses, railroads, logistics. Ukrainian Energy Ministry admits that over 20 towns right now, as of this broadcast, and are cities without power right now. Because of these overnight and into this morning Russian airstrikes. So here is the strike that hit these areas in Odessa. These are in the dark of night, hitting these supply depots in Odessa and other parts of the country. This is in the Nikolaev area. According to reports, more than 10 NATO shipment arrivals landed at these storage facilities. This equipment would then be transferred to the armed forces of Ukraine. Ukraine would then use these weapons to continue shelling the Donbass region, which they did overnight. So this is amazing that Ukraine, even under all of this attack, hitting all of their ammunition depots and everything else, they still managed to fire on the Donbass and still target residential areas. They're sticking to it. They're sticking to their guns on this. It's unbelievable. They hit multiple civilian targets overnight, did Ukraine. Ukraine hit multiple residential areas. Apartment complexes were hit. One particularly tragic story, journalist Steve Sweeney, who's in the Donbass reporting, says that a woman who was killed during Ukraine's shelling of Donetsk's Petrovsky district yesterday has been named as Ilona Nikolaevna. She stopped on her way to work to provide emergency care to those who were just wounded in another shelling attack. As she was helping them, another rocket struck and then she died instantly.
Oh, there's a name for this. Actually, that's a tactic I've read about that the United States has used in Arabic-speaking countries and their war on terrorism. What is called?
So I don't know the name of it.
Or something like that. Or
anybody else in the chat know what this is?
This is a tactic where you bomb once and then when rescue workers come in, you bomb again.
You bomb again. So that's exactly what Ukraine did here. But they're doing it with civilians. But then NATO forces launched another shell. They killed her and wounded civilians nearby. So here is a local shop that was also shelled by Ukrainian forces just before noon, one of the busiest times of the day. One man had his legs blown off, fighting for his life at this hour. 4 others were injured. Again, these are civilians, shop owners. This is daily life, though, of course, for the residents of the Donbass who face daily shelling in this genocide. So this NATO weapons depot was hit hard overnight, destroying all of these new NATO weapons that just arrived from Romania. Take a look. And the air defense system sitting next to the airport runway was totally destroyed. So these, again, are NATO depots that were totally destroyed. Baiting, some people are saying it's called a double tap.
I thought it was double tap.
Grim just said double tap.
Double tap. So you bomb an area. So Ukraine bombs an area. Civilians go to help. And then and then we're going to just fire them again. We're going to shoot them in and, fire them up again. That's great. That's what they do. But that's just one example. And then around 4 a.m., Putin launched a massive barrage of attacks with Caliber and possibly hypersonic missiles, according to reports. These struck countless air defense targets all over central Ukraine. These strikes were similar to what we saw about 48 hours ago, taking out a lot of air defense targets. Other reports coming in today showing Russia hit Ukrainian military behind their lines in the Kharkiv and Kherson area in the Nikolaev region. Again, according to the military reports we're getting, this is the largest attack of the war so far since the first days of the so-called special military operation. And as Colonel Douglas Macgregor told us last night, Putin hasn't even done anything yet, that these are just small jabs And he hasn't even launched the right hook yet, the massive offensive that could be coming in the first few weeks of June. Listen.
And right now, Putin and his forces have been acting like a heavyweight champion that only uses a left jab. In other words, he's jabbing with all of these strikes and doing enormous damage. He hasn't let loose his right, which are hundreds of thousands of Russian combat troops. So the future doesn't look good if you're sitting in Kiev, if you're Ukrainian right now. Does that make any difference to people in Washington? Yes, but what can they do? They can double down.
So are they going to double down? European leaders are worried that the United States is not doubling down. In fact, the Financial Times reporting this morning that Ukraine's allies fear the military support will fade in a U.S. election year and only 5 months are left of money and funding, and that the United States might not fund it after that. Let's quote from the Financial Times. Washington has been Ukraine's dominant source of weaponry, and U.S. officials say sufficient pre-approved funds remain to sustain Kiev for about 5 more months. That's it. Covering a crucial counteroffensive planned for the coming weeks. I love how they keep saying that Ukraine's about to launch a counteroffensive in the coming weeks.
Well, actually, just today, I saw, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, that they're saying, well, there's a mini counteroffensive before the counteroffensive. It's like a little
an aperitif
prep jump. Yeah. Or a moose. Yes.
And a moose boosh.
Dress rehearsal.
Yes. This has happened. It's the mini before the real thing happens. And so there was a little bit of gains on the battlefield, and we're calling it the pre-show, I guess. Opening act.
It's like, what gains on the battlefield? Literally, Bakhmut is about to fall, is basically totally collapsed and surrounded by Russian forces. Where is this little mini offensive? I mean, maybe they're hitting some targets inside of Russia with long-range weapons from NATO, but that's about it. European allies, though, are increasingly uncertain about whether the U.S. will come close to matching its existing $48 billion package, according to the Financial Times, adopted in 2022, they say, particularly as it requires a vote in Congress this autumn against the backdrop of more partisan debate on the war. So they're basically saying they're going to try to vote on it, and there's no way.
Well, there was a proposed bill to make it U.S. law to support Ukraine until the bitter end. It hasn't gone anywhere, thankfully. But if that were to pass, then there'll be no haggling over this package and then that package and then that package, like COVID relief aid. It just would be open checkbook.
No one knows, said a European official, one of 10 senior figures in countries allied with Ukraine, who spoke to the Financial Times about the next phase of the war. The final paragraph here: we can't keep the same level of assistance forever, the senior official added, arguing the current rate of support could be sustained for a year or possibly 2, but not more. And now the members of the military say Ukraine is a total lost cause. So national security experts have penned an open letter to the New York Times. An open letter calling for a swift diplomatic end to the war in Ukraine was published in Tuesday's New York Times. The letter has 14 signatories, that mostly former U.S. military officers and other national security officers, including Jack Matlock, former ambassador to the Soviet Union Ann Wright, a retired U.S. Army colonel, former diplomat Matt Ho, former Marine Corps officer, State Department officials, retired colonel who served as Colin Powell's chief of staff. The list is long. Many are longtime critics of U.S. foreign policy, post 9/11 war policies. The letter calls for calls the war in Ukraine on the part of the United States and NATO an unmitigated disaster, and cautions that future devastation could be exponentially greater as nuclear powers creep ever closer toward open war, they say. And they say the expansion of NATO is directly to blame. That they thought, well, expanding NATO to Putin's doorstep? What did you think was going to happen? This. The letter entitled, "The U.S. should be a force for peace in the world." That was what they named this letter. It's almost laughable, like anyone in Washington really wants to do that. They're urging the Biden administration to pivot hard right now towards pursuing a negotiated peace agreement and to end this war quickly. They say this reality is not entirely of our own making, yet it may well be our undoing, the letter concludes, unless we dedicate ourselves to forging a diplomatic settlement that stops the killing and diffuses tension, they say. Hallelujah. Like, we are vehemently anti-war on this show. Hopefully they'll pay attention to this letter, and maybe they'll be receptive to it.
Well, I'm not holding my breath because
Yeah.
Biden is on his way to the G7 summit in Japan, and
just arrived, yeah.
he's going to be meeting with other Western leaders. And surely the rhetoric about Russian sanctions will get louder over the next few days. It would be wonderful if that would happen.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't hold our breath for it.
Thank you so much for watching this segment here at Redacted. We are live every day at 4 p.m. Eastern Time, trying to share the stories that the mainstream media will not cover. You should also come over and join our community of Redacted Rebels over at redacted.inc. That's our private locals community where we can share exclusive content that we simply cannot share here on YouTube. Come over and join the rebellion together right now by going to redacted.inc. We'll see you next time.